everybody. Welcome into the latest edition of the Postcast, production of the Casper Star-Tribune and Pokes Authority. I am Davis Potter, Wyoming beat writer for the Star-Tribune, and I'm joined by my sidekick and former Wyoming beatnik, Brandon Foster. Brandon, pretty quiet week on the athletics beat here so far.
The folks at UW didn't want us to have to vamp too much on this week's podcast, I guess. So
yeah, since we started the podcast back, I guess like you were saying before we started recording, that since we're back now, they just decided to give us all this news at once. So, but obviously we're being facetious because it's been a very newsy week in terms of Wyoming athletics, and particularly with the football program, with some additions and some tractions to the coaching staff. You can find complete coverage on trib.com and pokesauthority.com, but just a quick overview. Wyoming lost an offensive coordinator, hired a new offensive coordinator in Tim Polasek from Iowa, and also rounded out its coaching staff with its final on-field assistant and offensive line coach Derek Frazier, who actually spent the last couple seasons as an assistant offensive line coach in the NFL with the New York Jets, but is from Fort Collins and has some experience coaching Mount West at both Colorado State and Fresno State. And we'll get into a little bit more on those hires here in a second, but obviously the reason that Wyoming has a new offensive coordinator is because Brent Vigen is no longer at Wyoming. Accepted the head coaching job at Montana State, and beyond that, Brandon, it's very weird now because that ends an 18-year run for Brent Vigen and Craig Bohl coaching together, going back to their days in North Dakota State, and I guess it's just sort of weird that those two are not going to be coaching together next season.
Yeah, I think it's not uncommon for the OC to be, one of the most scrutinized and second-guessed, members of a football team's coaching staff. Kind of similar in the way that, the backup quarterback is always the fans' favorite player. But,
Wait, Brent Vigen was scrutinized during his time at Wyoming?
I mean, if maybe not while you've been on the beat. I don't know, but I sure got a few Twitter mentions about it.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I mean, and my take on the whole thing was kind of independent of the job that he did. It just kind of never felt like it mattered too much. Not that it mattered, but it felt like he and Bohl were always kind of part and parcel, right? Like they were a package together. So any criticisms or praise put upon Vigen, I always felt like kind of went to Bohl as well, right? He was always, they were
right,
one and the same for so many years, and I think this is probably the most likely way in which that that pairing would break up is for Vigen to leave for another gig. I just I felt like it would. I couldn't envision exactly what it would take for them to fire Vigen. If as so many of my Twitter followers had hoped for. It was like, if you don't like Vigen but you like Bohl, like you do kind of have to come to terms with that paradox, because I do think that they shared a lot of philosophy as far as what they wanted the offense to be.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt about that, and Wyoming's always going to be that power run game and then go from there under Craig Bohl. But, yeah, to your point, rarely, particularly in this age of football at any level, with the money and just the amount of turnover that there is and how frequent it usually is, you're not going to find a coaching tandem like that sticks around together and basically joined at the hip for almost 2 decades. That's almost unheard of nowadays. But, it is interesting, though, because, Craig Bohl, like I said, they've been around that long. Now all of a sudden he's in the market for a new offensive coordinator. But I think he always had a short list because, he made this new hire relatively, the day after, or 2 days after officially. There were reports coming out on Tuesday that Tim Polasek was going to be his choice, and then Wyoming officially announced it on Wednesday. So, it just you wonder sort of what his mindset is now. It's like, I've been with this guy for so long. Everything's been, we've been in this together. We've been in this routine, and I said something about this on Twitter when Vigen left for Montana State is. I'm not sure that Brent Vigen deserves the amount of flack that he got. Now, I think some of the criticism of him and the play calling and just the way the offense is tailed off in general, over the last handful of years, I think some of that is justified. But when you're together that long, sometimes you can get in a rut, and sometimes things can get stale, and I think it might be beneficial for both sides for Brent to go on, do his own thing, sort of form his own identity as a head coach, and then at Wyoming, it's a chance for Craig Bohl, to maybe start fresh and develop some new ideas on offense and some new things he can implement. And it's been very interesting to hear Craig Bohl talk this offseason about the offense, because while he's always going to run the pro style, like we talked about the power run game, and that's always going to be Wyoming's identity. I have never in my 2 years on this beat, I've never heard him talk as much about having to. The term he keeps using is re-engineer. In terms of obviously being able to be more efficient in the passing game when you run the ball as well as they do, being able to be more efficient in the play action passing game in particular, but just him talking about getting guys in space more and needing to diversify not only the passing game but the running game as well. When 90, like we talked about last week, 95% of your runs coming between the tackles, that makes you very predictable in what you're doing. And he met with the media on Wednesday after Wyoming officially announced Polasek's hire, but I asked him specifically, like, is that something you need to do even in the running game, is be more diverse? And he was like, yeah, absolutely it is. And we need to get guys more on the perimeter and use every part of the field rather than always running north and south. So I think that's interesting, and we'll get a little bit more into Polasek here, but that's somebody that Craig Bohl is obviously familiar with. They coached together at North Dakota State before Craig Bohl came to Wyoming, and you mentioned some of your Twitter actions, but going by some of mine too. I think there's a majority of the fan base that's sort of taking a wait-and-see approach to this and seeing if things are actually going to change. Because one thing, you always talk about it, but when you bring in yet another former assistant, another one of your guys, and the perception is, Craig Bohl really likes to keep it in the family and hire all these coaches that he's familiar with. I'm curious what your opinion is on him bringing in another one of his guys, so to speak.
Right. Yeah, I think I kind of had a similar initial reaction as how, as much as people wanted a change with the way that Wyoming's offense operates. How different would it really be if it was another guy who coached under Bohl at NDSU? I think I would imagine, and I'm just kind of speculating here. I don't know a ton of Polasek's background, but or exactly what Iowa's identity has been the last couple of years. I know they've had a strong arm quarterback themselves with Nate Stanley recently, but I would imagine that as similar as they must be if they both come from Bohl's North Dakota State lineage. Each coach is a different coach, and maybe this is a way to strike that balance of they're not gonna. I don't think they're ever going to change their true identity of what they want to be as a program, right? They're going to be that smash mouth team. They're going to be a team with a hard-nosed, up-the-gut run game as a big piece of what they do, but maybe this is a way to keep that ethos while also introducing, a new person. Like you said, maybe that freshness helps there, and presumably he has a few wrinkles he can add, like we were talking about last week. He's been at a different program. He's been away from Bohl for 7 years. Maybe this is a way to strike that balance with still keeping your identity, but switching things up a little bit. But yeah, I obviously can speak a little bit more to Vigen than Polasek, and as I guess so can you, as far as our familiarity with the two. But
yeah,
I think the frustration was obviously there, and like you said, for pretty understandable reasons the last few years. When you're not completing 50% of your passes, that's going to bring criticism. I think Vigen is his, just looking back at his tenure at Wyoming, it's I don't know if he's a unique person to evaluate, but he's certainly not an easy one, I think, to sum up, because for all the struggles that they have had offensively in recent years, especially through the air, he's always going to be the guy who, the first line in the AP story about the hiring is, the guy who brought Carson Wentz to North Dakota State and Josh Allen to Wyoming.
Right.
And there aren't that many NFL starting quarterbacks who came from, non-Power 5 schools, much less non-FBS schools. And when you got two of them on your resume, you got to imagine that's what got him hired at Montana State, right? At the end of the day,
yeah,
he's familiar with the region, all that, but he's still, you're never going to be able to take that away, right? As far as his resume goes. But I think, kind of the tough thing to evaluate is, you look at a year like 2017, and I think it kind of sums it all up. They had Josh Allen, they had this soon to be first round pick, crazy talented quarterback that Brent recruited and developed. I think, it gets a little oversimplified that, like, man, Brent Vigen, like, went out into the wild and came back with this raw hunk of talent nobody had ever seen. Like, Dave Brown was the Wyoming assistant who first found Allen and then, passed him along to Vigen, who looked at his tape. But, nonetheless, like, he did get these guys, but in 17, like, even with Allen, they couldn't do squat on offense. And, it is a little bit of that mixture of, do you want the guy who can maybe find the next Josh Allen? I think you probably do, but at the end of the day, that that's not the entirety of the resume. And I think in a way they really established after Allen what actually this offense, I think, looks like under Craig Bowl. A lot, not that they didn't run the ball, obviously, with Brian Hill in the first few years of Bowl's tenure, but it really became a power run centric offense after Allen. And my guess is that's a little bit more of what the true identity was with Vigen, and Allen being as talented as he was, they kind of adjusted to him and made use of him. And early in Bowl's tenure, they had some of these skill players left over from the Dave Christensen era who, he recruited for an entirely different type of offense. And smartly, they aired the ball out and threw it to Tanner Gentry and Jake Hollister and guys like that. But, I think the last few years, they established that power run identity, maybe too much, but they definitely established it. Now they have it, and it's just a question of how do you build on it.
Yeah, I do wonder too if some of that was maybe with breaking in such a young quarterback once Josh left in 2018 with Tyler Vanderwall, how much of that was just them just trying to take the pressure off of him, and then when he wasn't performing when they did throw the ball, then they make the switch to Sean Chambers, and then the last 3 years it's just been one injury after another. So sort of as we've referenced to in the past, there just hasn't been a whole lot of stability there. And you're playing all these young guys at quarterback. Did they just decide, hey, let's just lead on our running game and our defense and just try to eke out these 20-17, 17-14 wins, things like that.
Yeah.
But it is interesting. I did ask Craig Bull, is Polasek going to have complete autonomy when it comes to play calling? And he said that's something he's always managed, which I found to be sort of interesting because it goes back to, did Vigen really deserve all that criticism? Because, was he actually the one that had full say in the play calling, or was Craig Bowl, butting in at times and sort of overseeing these play calls and signing off on them or not? And I do remember Brent, a year or so ago, when I talked to him specifically for a story I was doing, he said, I have the freedom. Craig Bowl, we've developed a relationship, and I have the freedom for the most part to go out there and do what I want to do, and he's giving me all these responsibilities. But the head coach ultimately is the one that gets to sign off on these things. So I think I do wonder if it's just how much maybe Craig Bowl stepped in and said, hey, let's lean on this, or let's do this, or let's do that. So, what was it completely Brent Vigen's offense, or how much did Craig Bowl maybe put his foot down at times, and he sort of referenced that again on Wednesday, saying he'll monitor it, and he even said that they'll discuss things offline in between offensive series during games. So just going back to Polasek himself and sort of his background, he comes from Iowa. He was the offensive line coach, and it's interesting because he really only has 3 years as a play caller at North Dakota State. And what's even more interesting about that is, as long as he coached under Craig Bowl at NDSU, he actually left for a year to go to Northern Illinois as an assistant in 2013. And then when he came back as NDSU's offensive coordinator in 2014, obviously Craig Bowl wasn't there. That was when he left to come take the UW job. So Craig Bowl actually wasn't even at NDSU when Polasek was the offensive coordinator there. But Craig said on Wednesday that he actually went back and he's watched a lot of those games and a lot of that film from those 3 years when Polasek was NDSU's offensive coordinator from 2014 to 2016. Right. And really, he liked his aggressiveness as a play caller. And another reason he said he was sold on making Polasek his OC is the fact that Polasek, Craig said every time that he gave him a task or an assignment to do, he always excelled at it. And that's interesting because this is a guy in Polasek who has a really diverse coaching background. I mean, he coached running backs, tight ends, fullbacks, was even Craig Bowl's special teams coordinator at NDSU. He even has experience coaching defensive backs during his coaching career. And then obviously at Iowa being Kirk Ferentz's offensive line coach for the last 4 years. So he's done a little bit of everything. And Craig said the fact that he's really excelled in that and has sort of gained a reputation as being really good no matter what the task that's asked of him is. That really helps sell him too. And then similar to Brent Vigen, Tim Polasek was also a quarterback, during his college days at Concordia University there in Wisconsin. So he said sort of a mixture of all that, and obviously the familiarity, having coached with him, brought him in, and really I'm still digging, doing a little research on exactly his time as a play caller at NDSU and look at some of the stats and seeing what he did with their offenses. But one thing that really stuck out to me, we've talked about the inefficiency that Wyoming's had in the passing game and the completion percentage. In Polasek's 3 years as the OC at NDSU, they never had a completion percentage less than 58%. And in 2 of those years, they actually completed 60% of their passes or more. Now I know that's FCS level. This is FBS, and the defenses are different. You face a different caliber of athlete. So is that going to translate over to Wyoming? Who knows? But I do think it's interesting that you bring in a guy that's had at least some success in what he's done and I think can relate to a lot of different positions on the field with some of the diversity in his coaching background.
Yeah, although I don't know if Wyoming has a Carson Wentz on its roster right now.
That's a good point too. Yeah,
slinging the football for some of those years. Yeah, I think it's funny that you mentioned that Bowl mentioned that he's watched a lot of tape from those years at NDSU just because maybe he's changed now since you've covered the beat, but when I was on it, he almost like never uttered the words North Dakota State. Kind of similar to Nebraska too. He would just say like my alma mater, and it felt like a very purposeful decision to like not try to rest on his laurels too much and make he wanted to be focused on Wyoming, which makes sense. But it's funny, you would almost, he won 3 national championships there, and you would almost never know that he coached in Fargo, and then of course he's still paying attention to what's going on there. I kind of wonder. I think there's 2 big things with a play caller. There's like the overall, mindset and game plan, right? Or what's our personality going to be as an offense? But then there's the play-to-play decisions and that, the kind of nitty-gritty of play calling and when do you bust out something creative? When do you stick with the more traditional. I'm kind of curious. I mean, I've watched plenty of Wyoming the last couple of years, but you've obviously watched more closely. When I was there, people would always kind of bemoan the lack of creative plays, and kind of seem to want a little bit more trickeration going on in the offense. Under Vigen, but then it also kind of seemed like they would try it at times, and it just wouldn't work. And ultimately, my opinion is, you're going to be a good offense because of the big picture stuff, not necessarily the great trick play you draw up. But I'm curious, over the last few years, did you get that sense as well, that the offense was a lot more vanilla than the fans were hoping for, as far as breaking out some highlight reel flea flicker stuff?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've only been here 2 years and on this beat 2 years, so it's hard for me to know what it looked like before. I guess 2018, when the first few years of Craig Bohl's era, when you were covering it. But yeah, I mean, it was pretty bland. I can remember basically just a handful of times when they tried some trickeration or something to give the defense a different look than what their offense had always shown. And that one of them was the flea flicker to start overtime at Boise State in 2019, which really that ball should have been picked off in the end zone. You remember that? Yeah. And that was, obviously Sean Chambers was hurt. Tyler Vanderwall was his backup and playing in that game. But that was one which I frankly, I thought that was, I mean, when you sit there and you hear from a lot of the fan base that we want more innovation, we want more trickeration, we want more, we want things that are different. And then he dials up a flea flicker on the first play of overtime. I mean, I don't know how you can complain about that when you're sitting there calling for some different aspects to your offense. Now, it went horribly wrong and didn't work. And like I said, it was thrown into double coverage and should have been intercepted. But I mean, I don't think that's something you can complain about a whole lot when you're sitting there and clamoring for something out of the ordinary in terms of your offensive play calling. And then there have been just a few end arounds, like with the wide receiver reverse off the power run game action. Isaiah Nair, their freshman receiver, actually had like a 50-something yard run this year. I think it was New Mexico. I can't quite recall which game it was, but outside of that, I mean, I just haven't seen much of it. And that's why I asked Craig Bohl on Wednesday specifically about the running game too, just because, like you said, I mean, nearly all of their runs are between the tackles and those A and B gaps. And, that turns into a tendency on tape for defenses. It's like, if this is all they're ever doing, then why do we need to prepare for something if they're not ever really throwing, a wrinkle in there to catch us off guard or something that's different that they're showing on tape? Then, why do we need to try to prepare for that? You know what I mean? So, we're going to have plenty of time to talk about this, but I do think Wyoming, if they don't change some things offensively, and I think with the way Craig Bohl is at least talking this all season, I think he's starting to understand it. But I think Wyoming is in danger of getting left behind when you talk about college football and the way offenses are evolving and what they are today. I mean, Nick Saban, when the spread offenses first became a thing, 6 or 7 years ago, it was him and Brent Bielema, who was the coach at Arkansas at the time in the SEC. They were complaining about it and talking about how bringing all this stuff in about this is dangerous and the pace could be dangerous for players. And then he realized, okay, well, everybody's doing that. I can either complain about it or I can adjust. And he adjusted, and now they're scoring 50 points a game and have some of the most prolific offenses in the country. Now, look, I get Alabama, they recruit an entirely different caliber of athlete than what you're going to get at Wyoming. But, I think that you have to do some more innovative things. I mean, these 14 to 10 games that Wyoming still plays at times, I mean, that's a thing of the past. I mean, you're just not seeing many games, scores like that in college football anymore. So I think they've really got to evolve in what they're doing. And like I said, I think Craig Bolt is starting to realize that. I mean, how could you not, after seeing the way this offense, in particular this passing game, has performed the last 3 or 4 years?
Yeah, I think another piece of it too, and I think you're right that maybe that just, hey, we're gonna out physical, we're gonna have huge offensive linemen, we're gonna run up the gut and beat you down. Maybe that works at FCS, but doesn't work in the Mountain West. I don't know. But I kind of also wonder, what we'll see, and it'll probably be a while before we know. But from Polasek, as far as quarterback development goes, I think, while Vigen has the reputation of a quarterback guru, because of recruiting Wentz and Allen, I think there are some fair questions to ask about, what he did developing them once they got there, and what he did to develop the people who came after Allen at that position. If I remember right, he mostly recruited Wentz. I don't think he coached Wentz, at least as a starter, at all at North Dakota State. And then, Allen obviously, was a all conference type player, but now that he's having this insane MVP caliber year in the NFL, people are like, wait, why did he not have better stats at Wyoming? And some of that is implicitly asking, like, why did Brent Vigen not develop him as much as oh man, why can I'm spacing out on the Buffalo OC's name, but obviously an NFL coordinator is different than college.
Brian Dable, you come up?
Brian Dable, yeah. And but you just kind of wonder, not that Allen didn't have a good career at Wyoming, but after Allen, you had Vanderwall, you have Chambers, who's struggled to develop thus far into a really consistent passer, and then I don't know, it just seems like there's a lot of raw talent at that position over the last 5 years in Wyoming, but I wonder how QB development will fare now compared to then. And I don't know. I'm not trying to say that Vigen could have done better, but it's something I wonder.
No, yeah, I think that's fair, and I don't think the injury aspect can be undersold. Because
sure.
We've referenced it, but for your starting quarterback to have a season-ending injury, each year for the past 3 seasons. I would like to see Sean Chambers go through a full season healthy and then see what we can do at that point. It's interesting because he's about to enter his 4th year in this program, and yet he's yet to play a full season for Wyoming. I would like to see that, and I think everybody sort of needs to see that before you can start really making real assessments on where this program is going in terms of the quarterback position. But it's interesting you bring that up, because I did ask Craig Bolt specifically on Wednesday about what he thinks Polasek can bring in terms of quarterback development, and he sort of sidestepped the question and started talking about, our quarterbacks, we need to be better, but also, it has to do with what you have around them and your receivers and running backs and supporting cast, and we need to be better in pass protection and all that stuff. But I think part of that answer comes from the fact that, again, he just doesn't have a whole lot of experience as an OC or quarterback coach. He's only in his whole career, he's only had 3 years where he's been a play caller. So there's really not much to go off of there. It's a very small sample size. So, I think in a way that this hire is a gamble. And everybody's just going to have to wait and see, what ends up happening at that position, just because, you don't know. There isn't a ton of history there in terms of Polasek calling plays.
And I know we've, kind of gone long on this segment, but I have one question for you. I'm just kind of curious. Do you think the impending departure of Vigen, or whether people kind of had a sense it was coming, if that played any role in AJ Blazek, spending 2 weeks in Laramie? I'm just pure speculation putting you on the clock, but
I highly doubt it. He had a Power 5 program calling, and it doesn't matter who you are, and
well, it's Illinois. Power, maybe like a lowercase p Power 5.
Are you talking?
Oh wait, that was
Bart Miller.
Yeah. I'm getting. There's been so many
I know
offensive line coaches. I'm getting.
That's fair.
Vanderbilt is probably in that category.
And unless you're like he was from Wyoming or Colorado and had a tie that was holding him here. I mean, you can't compete with Power 5 money, even as an assistant. So, yeah, they've had some really bad luck in the offensive line hiring department in particular. They hired Clayton Adams a few years ago, and then he left like a month later to be an assistant O-line coach for the Indianapolis Colts. So, and I don't blame Craig Bowl at all. Like, you go out there and hire the best coaches that you can hire. And, if somebody comes from a Power 5 or NFL job comes along, well, that's just part of it. Like, I don't think he should be settling for a lesser coach just because he's scared somebody might come along and take him. Like you're getting paid a lot of money to make your program the best that it can be. So, I mean, you go out there and hire the best coaches that you can. But yeah, they've definitely had some tough luck in that department. But Brandon, a very interesting side note to this is that Brent Vigen's first game as Montana State's coach is going to be back here in Laramie at War Memorial Stadium against Wyoming. And we've talked about sort of the general reaction and some of the fans' thoughts about Brent Vigen.
Nice.
Or I have to imagine that if Brent Vigen comes back to Laramie and pulls off the upset over Wyoming in the war, like, most of their heads are just going to spontaneously explode, right? Like,
that's what I was going to say. That's the only way you could react at that point. Yeah, I mean, I think in general you got to hope you're not at the point anymore where you're losing your FCS game. But I won't pretend to know enough about Montana State to know if they have any shot, but they certainly have a better shot at beating Wyoming specifically than they did 2 weeks ago. I mean, they got a guy who now knows the ins and outs of who he's playing. So yeah, that'll be interesting. I wonder, kind of how the crowd reaction will be too if they do, put the camera on him and say, "Hey, it's Brent Vigen." That'll be interesting because as much flack as he has gotten over the years, I think there were he's the reason Josh Allen ultimately came to Wyoming, and also there were flashes, right, of what a peak Craig Bowl offense might look like. I think when you look at the way they beat Missouri, there were times when it did click and it worked, and then there were just unfortunately a lot of times when it didn't click.
Well, it'd be one thing for them to pull off the upset, which you're talking about an FCS program, Montana State against an FBS. I don't expect it to happen, although Wyoming's last couple of games against FCS teams have been mighty tight. I think a lot closer than
That's true.
Almost too close for comfort. But what if Brent Vigen came in? Yeah. I mean, Idaho, they were an offensive pass interference call away from Idaho in 2019 from losing that game. But what if Brent Vigen came in here and dropped 30, 35 points?
With just like a whole bunch of like Hail Marys and trick plays and just airing the ball in.
Yeah.
I think we'd have a riot in downtown Laramie.
Oh my God. It'd be something. But yeah, so it'll be interesting to see what Tim Polasek does with this offense and what really him and Craig Bowl do now, because as we mentioned so many times, that was such a partnership between him and Brent Vigen, and now he's transitioning into a new play caller that he's going to have to get used to, and to an extent, in terms of running the offense and in terms of what they want to do and maybe what wrinkles that they want to implement. And it was interesting because Craig Bowl also said on Wednesday that every time we sort of asked him about how specifically can Polasek come in here and diversify things, he said multiple times, I can't really get into specifics. I'm not going to get into a bunch of detail about what we're thinking about. So obviously those wheels are turning in his head in terms of maybe some different variations or some different wrinkles that he wants to bring to Wyoming's offense. But Brandon, we've gone long enough in this first segment, so we'll take a break. When we come back, we will transition into Wyoming basketball and talk a little bit about the upcoming Mountain West tournament. Welcome back into the Postcast, and now we're going to talk some Wyoming basketball, which, Brandon, hasn't been great as of late. Cowboys have lost 4 straight games, and coming off a particularly bitter sweep at the hands of Colorado State, their rival, and in 2 games they really could have won. But long story short, this defense continues to struggle. Allowing Colorado State and I think both games to shoot better than 55% from the floor. And what was interesting about the second game of that series was the fact that they held Colorado State without a field goal for the last 8 minutes of that game, yet the start was so bad where Colorado State, I think, shot 60%, 61% from the floor in the first half. And got up by as many as 18 points in that first half that Wyoming just sort of had to play catch-up the whole second half and never quite caught all the way up and ends up getting swept. And a not-so-great side note for Wyoming in that series, they've lost 5 of the last 6 matchups to Colorado State and have been swept in the regular season series the last 2 years. So their only win during that time was that upset in the Mountain West tournament last season.
Yeah. I think you maybe trade a Mountain West tournament upset over the Rams for you might give a few regular seasons for that honor, but yeah, it just feels like these games are always close, and I know they're not literally always close, but it feels like there's so many heartbreakers on both sides over the last 5 or so years in the series, and. With the Utah State series getting canceled right after, you just kind of got to, sit with that bitter taste in your mouth. And then, who knows what even the rest of the season is going to look like right now with the COVID situation with New Mexico. I'm sure they would much rather, get right back out there and be able to put that frustration towards another game.
Yeah. By the way, speaking of Mexico, did you see where their game against Colorado State earlier this week was canceled like 20 minutes before tip-off?
I did not see that.
Yeah, that was crazy. Apparently New Mexico had an assistant coach who had tested positive or something. There was somebody part of the traveling party had been around him, and they didn't find out until they actually made the trip down to Fort Collins. But yeah, this whole COVID thing is a mess. And as you mentioned, the Wyoming isn't playing this week because their series at Utah State was postponed, is what they're calling it. But now that they've had 2 series postponed, UNLV, which was supposed to be their opening series of Mountain West play back in December, that was also called off. And when you just look at the schedule, they've got only one break in their schedule going forward before the Mountain West tournament, and that's the week before the Mountain West tournament. So, unless you're going to make both those teams play 2 series in a week, I'm pretty sure one of those is just going to be canceled at the minimum, if not both of them. I think they'll try to play at least one of them, but there's just not a whole lot of time left before the Mountain West tournament to do that.
Yeah, that'd be a pretty sour note to kind of have your season fizzle out on, more or less, or at least to have linger. But yeah, I know, kind of along those lines, just looking down, it's already mid-February somehow, and March is around the corner, and looking at what, this Mountain West tournament is even going to look like. I know you just had a story about it. I think there's just, it's tough. Maybe it's easier to digest when you are a rebuilding team and you are in the first year of a new head coach's tenure, to kind of have some of these roadblocks, so to speak, as opposed to if you were ready to make your run this year, so to speak. But it's got to be tough to kind of process all that as a young team and a team still trying to get its footing.
Yeah. Well, the good news for Wyoming is that the schedule, assuming these games get played, is going to lighten up a little bit. They just got done, or I guess not done, but you just play San Diego State and Colorado State back to back, and then their next game is scheduled for February 17th against New Mexico in Colorado Springs, and then they're supposed to end the regular season with a series against San Jose State. But the Mountain West tournament, I want to hit on a little bit because you mentioned that, and I do have a story up at trib.com and postauthority.com, with Jeff Linder's opinion about, where the tournament should be played and how many teams, should be in it, because there's been some varying opinions among some coaches in the Mountain West, specifically Linder's former boss and Boise State coach Leon Rice, who is not against, moving the tournament, to campus sites in order to avoid, all 11 teams convening in Las Vegas and, further exposing them to the virus. And, he even has said he would be for, cutting down on the number of teams that go. Now, obviously, teams have different motives. Different teams have different motives at this time of the season, right? Like, everybody's looking out for their best interest. And when you're talking about Boise State, Colorado State, Utah State, San Diego State, those teams are all right in the thick of the discussion in terms of an at-large berth to the NCAA tournament, whereas teams like Wyoming, their only chance of making it to the NCAA tournament is by getting the conference's automatic bid by winning the conference tournament. So I'm curious your opinion about maybe what they should do. And I don't want to give everything away here because I do want people to go read my story. But as of now, the Mountain West tournament, everything's the same. The format's the same, number of teams, and it's still scheduled to be played in Vegas as of this very second that we're recording this podcast, which is on a Thursday afternoon. But, my opinion on it is, frankly, to be honest with you, I don't think anybody should be playing a conference tournament. Like, if they said, hey, Davis Potter, you can be NCAA basketball commissioner for a day, what would you do? Like, I would be like, we're just nixing all those, and then we can give the automatic bid to the NCAA tournament to our regular season champion. Because I just think with all of the travel and how that sort of increases the risk of exposure to people, I think it's going to be a mess. So I wouldn't do that. But Brandon, as you and me and anybody that pays attention to college athletics knows, they're having the NCAA tournament and they're having these conference tournaments because they make money.
Right.
So they're going to be played. So with that being said, I tend to agree with Jeff Linder. Like, I think all the teams should go and play, because to his point, these teams have done so much due diligence and have worked so hard to even play the amount of games that they had and to have a season and even get to this point. But in terms of where it's played, I would tend to agree with Leon Rice and even anybody else who thinks that conference tournaments should probably be moved to campus sites. Like, I think you can do that. The Mountain West is during the regular season, they already had the revised schedule to where you're playing these 2-game series on campus sites everywhere to cut the amount of road trips that these teams have during the regular season in half, essentially. And that's what you could do with the first round. If you move the tournament to campus sites, you're essentially cutting the amount of teams that have to travel in half for the first round. So that's my opinion on it. Like, I think the tournament should go to campus sites, but I still think everybody should participate in it, because I think every team that's gotten to this point and is still playing has earned the right to do that.
Yeah.
But I do think you need to limit the exposure as much as possible, particularly in a year where the Mountain West has 4 teams. If all 4 of those teams actually end up making it to the NCAA tournament, it would be the most teams that the Mountain West has sent to the tournament since they had 5 back in 2013. So this is a really good year. So what you don't want to do is send everybody to the same place. This is my opinion, but you don't want to send everybody to the same place, risk them being exposed, having a bunch of positives, knocking the rest of your roster out because of contact tracing. Then you're not able to go to the NCAA tournament. I mean, that would look bad on the Mountain West's part, in my opinion. But I'm curious, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think every year when I was on the beat at Mountain West Media Days in Vegas, the one of the biggest conversations was always how to we get the Mountain West back to being, not just a multi-bid league, but, consistently multi-bid and like you're saying, more than two, 2, 3, 4, 5 teams in the tournament. How does that happen? And, everyone agrees, obviously, at the beginning of the year that it's important. But, I think you get to this particular fork in the road, and, yeah, there are different answers for different programs depending on where you are in the standings. Like, I 100% sympathize with Jeff Linder's point that, it would stink for his team to put all this effort in to, avoid getting COVID and play the season amidst all this, craziness and then not even get to go to the tournament. That said, I think if you really do want to make the Mountain West into the type of basketball conference that it was, 6, 7, 8 years ago, which I should say, everyone agrees is a benefit even to the teams that aren't going to the tournament, because when you have 4 teams in the tournament, suddenly those are all really high quality games that everyone else in the conference gets on their schedule. Everyone's strength of schedule grows by proxy. It's good for everyone when that happens. If you want to get to that, I think it makes a lot of sense to avoid those kind of landmines that you're talking about. I mean, whether it's getting potentially everybody sick right before the tournament, or having, like you mentioned in your article, somebody, I mean, this is a risk every year, but lose a fluke game to a crummy team and screw their resume up. I think it's certainly a bitter pill to swallow for the teams that wouldn't get to go. But if you're thinking about how do we set the conference up for success, like you mentioned, you got 4 teams in the top 50, I think, of net rankings, and if you think they can get in, with what they've done so far, I think long term it's best for the conference to make sure they get in there. And I think, probably the simplest thing is, like you said, if they just didn't play conference tourneys at all, then that'd be one thing. But I think limiting the amount of exposure is a big part of that. I don't know. I would not expect any coach who was going to get the short stick on that, to advocate for it. Certainly, if your team was at risk of not getting to play, I understand why you would, your argument would be for everybody getting to play. But I think for the conference as a whole, you introduce some risk there that you get 1 or 2 fewer teams into the tournament if something goes wrong, or heck, all 4. If there's a super spreader event in Vegas, then you're going to feel silly. And I mean, at the end of the day, you want to play, but like, how realistic is it that the folks are going to run the table? I know last year they made some magic happen, but that's not enough to get you to the tournament, right? You got to win the whole dang thing. And what's actually the chance that that's going to happen this year? I mean, you want to play as many games as you can. You want that experience for your players. But if the conference really wants to solidify itself as a basketball power again, you wonder if these mistakes are, unforced errors on their part.
And obviously, look, the primary concern here is the health and well-being of players and the coaches, the support staff, your assistant, all of that. That I think that goes without saying. But to your point, like, as good of a year as the Mountain West is having this year so far, in terms of the top of the conference, and having this many teams that are in the running, you would think the Mountain West would do everything in its power to try to protect that. And to an extent, I understand what Leon Rice is saying when, talking about, let's reduce the tournament field and maybe, keep the bottom 4 or 5 or however many teams at home, in the sense that, as we've talked about before too, there's just not, from a numbers standpoint and the net rankings, there's just not that many. There's more landmines than there are resume builders in this conference, right? So if you go to the tournament and you get beat in your first round, you would rather it be against a top 100 net team rather than a Wyoming or a Fresno State or San Jose that's near the 200s or in the 200s. But at the same time, it's also like, man, just beat them. Yeah, like if you're that much better, man, just beat them. Like if I don't, I mean, they just got Boise State. I'm talking about just got swept by Nevada too. Like, that's not exactly handling your business. If you're talk about yourself as being so much better than the rest of the field outside of the top 4 or 5 teams in the conference, just go there and win. Like, and it might be one thing if they were to play with, or they were down 3 or 4 starters, but because of COVID or whatever. But at that point, if a team gets 3 or 4 guys infected, then it's going to wipe out the rest of the team. So they're not going to be playing anyway because of contact tracing. But just go beat them if you're that much better.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that argument is certainly a factor as far as those landmine teams like you mentioned who can really screw up your resume. But that doesn't really have anything to do with COVID. Like that is a possibility every single year you go to the tournament. You could lose a game you shouldn't and screw up your resume. I mean, it'd be a nice benefit for those teams that they don't have that risk anymore. But that it feels a little bit disingenuous to suggest that that's any different this year than a non-pandemic year. And yeah, I think I get when you're a head coach, you probably get asked this question and you got to have an opinion on it. But knowing the way that coaches are and athletes are and teams are, it probably makes the most sense to not try to micromanage too much or get out and lobby too much and maybe spend more of your energy just kind of, okay, let's win the games in front of us. That seems to be the mindset of your average head coach, right? Is maybe stay out of the politics of it all and just let's play who we have to play and hopefully make it to Indianapolis.
Right. Well, yeah, and as I mentioned, everything right now with the Mountain West tournament is still on as scheduled in Vegas with all 11 teams going to participate in it as of now. But something tells me we probably haven't heard the end of this. And it's crazy to think, we are less than a month away from it now. It's supposed to start March 10th, both the men's and women's tournaments there at the Thomas and Mack Center in Vegas. So it's getting closer and closer. But as far as Wyoming goes, we mentioned the 4-game losing streak. Their next game scheduled for New Mexico on February 17th. We'll see if that series ends up getting played at this point. But they've inserted another freshman into the starting lineup in Graham Ike, which I'm sort of disappointed we don't get to see that matchup, at least right now this week, with him and Nemish Keita, who's probably the best big in the Mountain West and probably a future pro. But it's going to be interesting just to see how all this plays out, what ends up happening, if anything ends up changing with the Mountain West tournament. But Brandon, I think we can go ahead and wrap it up there. Any parting thoughts?
Yeah, I guess, just one thing I thought of real quick in addition is, when you mentioned maybe it makes the most sense for the NCAA to kind of call off these conference tournaments and just, use the at-large bids and everything use the automatic qualifiers from the regular season. We're coming off a year in which the NCAA tournament just did not happen at all. And you would think the last thing anybody wants is for these conference tournaments to screw up the tournament again. And, maybe it still happens, but you have, 4 teams that can't go, or you have 3 star players who aren't able to play or whatever. Maybe you're playing with fire a little bit, trying to get them both in. And the money is the money, but I would imagine you're going to make a little less money this year and with that tournament than you normally would. I don't know. I assume attendance is not going to be full. Fewer people are going to go to Vegas just to hang out for that week, which is a great week of college basketball, by the way. People always go out for the first week of the big dance, but back before the pandemic, that was kind of the crazy fun week to be there, was when all those conference tournaments were going on. But fewer people are going to do that. Maybe it's the smart move to just preserve the NCAA tournament. And we've seen over the last year the actual bubble situations seem to work pretty well. You look at the NBA, the NHL, the haphazard sort of traveling and hoping it works. It comes with its side effects, as we've seen from all the other leagues. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, you kind of just cross your fingers and hope March doesn't get screwed up, I guess.
Well, and that's why they have relocated the entire NCAA tournament to Indianapolis and the surrounding areas, is to keep everybody sort of in a bubble as much as they can. But the problem is you got to get everybody there healthy first, Yeah. So, it's very interesting. So that's why I say it's going to be interesting to see how all this plays out as we go down the stretch here of the regular season and then get into the conference tournament. As of right now, every single one of them is on. 31 Division I conferences are playing right now, and none of them have canceled their conference tournaments yet. So definitely something to keep an eye on. But we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. As always, stay tuned to Trib.com and PokesAuthority.com for all of our coverage. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Pokes Authority. You can follow me on Twitter at Davis E. Potter. You can follow Brandon on Twitter at BFoster91. This podcast is on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, and Omni. So follow along, download it, share it, give us that 5-star rating. Brandon, I appreciate you joining me, and we will catch up with all of you guys next week, and thanks always for listening.
Do that.